Welcome to the Strongman SIG channel, featuring weekly episodes with industry titans who can help coaches and athletes improve in strongman. I'm your host, Heidi Campo, and today we have joining us is Rick Howard. And I'm going to open up to Rick here in just a second, but I first want to let you know that today we are primarily going to be talking about scientific literature and how that can be useful in strongman. I hope you guys can tune into these episodes weekly and remember to like, comment, share so we can get some anabolic dialogue going on this page. So Rick, welcome. Let's kick this off with a few easy questions. Can you tell everybody who you are, how long you've been involved in strongman, and then something that gives you either a unique or helpful perspective in the sport?
Well, great. Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you here today. I'm Rick Howard. So I've been involved in strongman for, I was trying to figure this out, 9 or 10 years now. We had at the New Jersey State Clinic of the NSCA, Art Boss presented on strongman way back when it was just kind of getting popular kind of at the state level. And I was mesmerized. I've been working out for years and I was really bored. You go to the gym like, all right, so we're doing squats today. What kind of squats are we doing? I'm like, great. So I needed something new and fresh. And then, Art presented on tire flips, Atlas stones, and a couple other implements. And I'm like, that's really cool. But I was helping to run the clinic, so I didn't want to get in the middle of all the stuff. And he invited me over to his house where he had all the implements. And so I started training a year later. So 2014 was my first contest. I did really poorly and I was hooked. It's so interesting because I loved working out, but for some reason, strongman it kept. So whatever it was, I'm like, I got to overcome this. So I started looking at some of the techniques and some of the literature, trying to figure out all of this stuff. And at the same time, I was working on my dissertation. So I got to know a little bit more about scientific literature and what to look for. And then I have the experience of having worked out for over, I guess I could say more than that even, but I'll stop there. But, to have some of a lot of people don't have the perspective to say 40 years ago, what did we know about weight training? We didn't know nearly as much as we do now. So then when you hear things about strongman, which still doesn't have the same level of evidence as some of the other implements or things that we use, that's because it hasn't really been researched that thoroughly as an implement to move forward with. So it's interesting to look at it from that perspective, although there is some data that strongly suggests that strongman is very beneficial for all different populations, from athletes to your common exerciser to somebody going through rehab. So I think that's part of the expertise, I guess you could say. And I think being an older athlete adds a different dimension because now it's even more challenging. I was out for a couple of years. I had to get some shoulder work done, a couple other things. So now I'm getting back into it and it is slow. So recognizing that, as you get older, they say it takes a little longer, recovery's longer. And I'm a living testament to the truth to that.
So funny. We had such a similar story of how we got into strongman. I got into the sport in 2015, and it was the same thing. I did terribly my first competition. I was like, that was awful. Let's do it again.
Right.
There's something about this sport.
Right. Yeah.
So tell us, so we're talking a little bit more about the literature side of things today. So we have a wide range of coaches in this group. We have athletes who, it's strongman. We always joke. It's like, we don't even read. So it's like, we have athletes on the opposite side of things where it's like they don't really even read scientific literature, but maybe they have a really good coach who does. We have coaches who maybe they're reading some research, maybe not, maybe they're just going off of working with other experts. And then we have people who are maybe a little bit more literature research intense. So can you talk a little bit about maybe the process of getting into reading research and how we can start to implement that for strongman specifically?
Sure. That sounds great. I teach even within my classes to look at Bob Sackett's three-legged stool. So a lot of people ignore that part. They just look at the literature. They'll look at one study and say, well, this study showed, so wow, this is definitely what we have to do. Well, when I did an undergrad a long time ago, my first professor said, literature proves nothing when you do scientific studies. One study shows you something, but it doesn't prove anything. It's recurring literature in the same topic that really tends to lend some credibility to whatever it is you're talking about. So if you look at the three-legged stool, the first leg is the scientific literature. What does the study say? What does the whole field of literature say within that particular topic? And within strongman, it's new. So there are some studies. There are a couple of top-notch researchers who've been looking at strongman studies for a while. but I think a lot of what they look at doesn't really resonate with somebody who is doing it just for general fitness or for somebody who's competitive, trying to figure out how do they gain a competitive advantage. So that's where the other two legs of the stool come in. One of those stools is personal preferences. So, it might be that the literature says that, if you are able to push the sled fast, then that's because you get a quicker turnover rate. You're getting your feet to move faster. And then, strongman training, like maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe just the mass helps to move it, and their biomechanics are such that they can move a little bit differently and still make it work. So the personal preferences are huge. And then the third leg is like, what do you see in the field? So when you're doing strongman training, there's a lot, I think, that those who compete in strongman or train with strongman, you'll see. And I think one of the key things there is that one of the beauties and magic pieces of strongman is that there isn't one set way to do any event. So that makes it a little bit more challenging to study. You can look at Olympic weightlifting, which basically has, your 4 phases, what's going on, and you could examine and break down each of those phases. You could look at how it applies in different instances, but with strongman, based on the biomechanics or the structure of each person who's lifting it, the weight category, the age category, it's going to be different. So to try to extrapolate from the research how that applies to a certain group of people, you'd really have to kind of break that down and said, all right, so we looked at, under 80 kilograms doing this particular event for this particular age group, and here's what we found. Well, that's not necessarily going to apply to all the other age groups or to both sexes or to a heavier or a lighter weight class. So even within a weight class, you'll find people are built differently. So they might do an exercise, maybe they're doing some type like a dumbbell press of some type, so maybe they're doing a circus dumbbell and you're lifting it, but depending on your anatomy and your shoulder mobility, you're going to hold the dumbbell different than somebody else does. So it doesn't make it wrong. And I think that's the magic of strongman is you can actually apply the implements to your body style, shape, and size, but it's also makes it a little bit more difficult to look at the research to see how that works.
And I completely agree. I mean, strongman is one of the most unique things out there. And that's certainly my draw to it. I had a background in powerlifting and I got kind of bored with it. And strongman was the natural progression from that. So would you say that scientific research in strongman is, I don't know if I want to say possible, but would you say it's something that we should still strive to be doing?
Oh, definitely. I definitely think that we should. Justin Keogh and Paul Winwood, I think, are two of the key researchers. So if anybody's looking for somebody to look up, those are probably two of the key individuals who have done some research in the area. And they've looked at some really neat stuff. So they look at like, what are some of the biomechanics of some of the lifts? And they find that there are some parallels between some strongman lifts and some Olympic lifts, for example. There are a lot of parallels based on fitness type training. So the same rep and set scheme for hypertrophy and for strength and metabolic conditioning apply with strongman implements as with traditional gym implements. So strongman does have a place within our regular training program, but there hasn't really been a lot of research to say, all right, so let's say I'm working with my college team and I want to get them in shape preseason. Would I ever use any strongman implements? Here's the other piece, like how many strength coaches have that experience and expertise to do it? So some of the research that's come out of strongman has also shown that there's a relatively high injury rate initially because nobody knows exactly how to do it, right? So you're trying all these different ways. So I think that if there was some research that had a little better handle on, all right, so if you happen to have this mobility challenge, perhaps try it this way. The research might be able to help bear some of that out. Or the research might be able to help us to say, like in a heavier weight class with limited mobility, maybe this is an easier way to lift the stone. Maybe for some categories, it's easier to try to one-time implements than it is to try to lap it and to change your position and move it. So depending on the population, I think there could be more research. The difficulty there, of course, becomes there's power in research, and power tells us that you have to have a certain number of subjects in a study if you want to be able to take that literature across the population. So if I only have 4 or 5 people, and so this is a word of caution for people reading research, you look at these small research studies, well, they found basically it's a pilot study, right? I found a few people who would actually do this for me. So I have 6, 7, or 8 people in my study, and here's what I found. Well, you can't extrapolate that across all populations and say, hey, this will work for everybody. So another challenge that we'll see in strongman research is how do I get enough students or subjects or strongmen within each segment to be able to look at all the different ways that I could implement strongman. And I think we need to start and then build on that. So maybe looking at what are some of the key things, and I think this would be great for this group. What are some of the key research questions you would love to see answered? Because that's what really drives research, right? So we'll have our own ideas, but what do people really want to know about, and how can we help move that forward?
You hit the nail on the head. I could not have said that better myself. So you compete in strongman. You also are a professor and you coach it as well, right?
Mhm.
You got a pretty good finger on the pulse here.
Yep.
So I know there are a lot of researchers in our group, and I've had a lot of people approach me at conferences and say, "Hey, I am a student or a researcher. I would like to do strongman research." What would you say are some of the biggest gaps that we could fill? And what would be the best way for these researchers who are interested in helping bridge that gap of strongman research to go about doing that?
Great question. And I think within the NSCA being a strength and conditioning organization, and with the advent of sports science and looking at all of the different avenues we could explore in that context, I would think that looking at how you can integrate strongman into traditional, quote, traditional training for athletes during different phases of training and what that might look like, and see how those benefits might manifest themselves. It seems that there's a concern among strength coaches and sport coaches primarily that, they don't want their athletes doing that because they don't understand it. So I think if we could really get it out there and say, hey, this is safe. Like, there's nothing wrong with lifting an atlas stone, right? There's nothing wrong. Like, some of the implements have gotten really good traction for the general population, right? Everybody has a sled. Everybody loves farmer's carries, right? But hardly anybody's doing a heavy yoke. Hardly anybody's doing heavy stones. So you look at some of the other implements that could really have a positive impact, especially on teams, because we often say, strongman is strength in motion, and that's what athletics is. Can you transfer that strength on a field or on a court? Can you move with something and be strong? So I think would have great application. We just don't have the research to show that. And I think once you get it to that higher level, then everybody else will adopt it. The other end, and we've had this conversation at some of our SIG meetings too, for the rehab population, for special populations, how would you integrate strongman conditioning to help with the recovery process? Sleds are a great example, and there's been some research done, or at least case studies, I guess is probably a better way to say it. So they looked at an individual and tracked how well they've progressed just by using a sled, because A, you can hold on to it, so you're going to be stable. B, you can add a load to it, so you're going to get stronger. And it does actually mimic increasing your stride rate and frequency. So that is how many times you step per minute and how far you get with each step. It makes them better. So I think looking at both ends of the spectrum, kind of like that top down, bottoms up approach, and then everything in the middle will kind of take care of itself from there.
Absolutely. No, and I love that. I love that because my grandmother, she is 93 years old. She is adorable. She's still kicking. I have fantastic genetics and I'm grateful for that. But she's slowing down a little bit. And so she doesn't feel very confident walking. But if you get her a grocery cart and she can hold on to that, her stride length is increasing and she can really pick up the movement. And what I would love to see for little Grandma Stella is if she could start pushing a sled. And, she's 93. It would be really light to start with. And that's something I think that we don't necessarily think of as coaches. We have coaches in this group that are personal trainers with a very diverse range of populations. You don't need to have them pulling a truck. If it's a little grandma, she may not like the Atlas stone. Maybe you start with a medicine ball. So that's where we get to use those skills as coaches to scale it up or scale it down, depending on the population we're working with. And I actually gave a lecture at, I think it was the 2021 NSCA Rocky Mountain Regional Conference. And I was talking a lot about that, progressions and regressions in strongman. And I was really trying to sell everybody on sandbag throws. And that's what I would love to see more research on, because in my opinion, I think sandbag throws are absolutely amazing. I would love to see those integrated more in high schools, in colleges. I mean, it's open chain. It beautifully teaches the triple extension. It gives you that high bar to shoot for. And I would just love to see more research in those ways. So what do you think are some of the, we already kind of talked about the challenges, but what would you say would be some of the specific events, like very specific events that we can research that haven't been researched that would have the greatest transfer across the board?
Well, that's the research question right there. Which event would have the greatest transfer across the board? Because we don't know, right? Like we know some of the events and I guess sometimes there's that whole notion that if somebody believes that it's going to work, it's going to work. So I think when you set up studies or you integrate these into programs, if the athletes or clients, whoever you're working with believes that it's going to help them, then it probably will. But if they get this notion that they're going to get hurt or this isn't the right thing, it's not going to help them. So figuring out maybe a comparative study for certain athletes, which one of the implements does tend to help them with production of force or ground reaction time that they need within their particular sport, I think that would be helpful. And then to your point with sandbag throws, I think that would be a great one because especially for being a little older, just a little, you lose that over time, right? And that's one of the things you need to keep going. So I'm still pretty good at some of the slow lifts, right? Like my deadlift's not too bad. If it's something slow, I can usually do it. But man, sandbags, it took me 3 months to finally get back into the swing of being able to express that power that I needed to be able to get the sandbag where it needed to be for a throw. And then I would say the same thing for a carry. Like sandbag carries are some of the most useful things you could do in terms of just general physical conditioning and quality of life. So how would you put that together? And maybe that's the other thing to look at. I love seeing those memes, right? Where they show Pujanowski carrying the heavy farmers and then they take another picture. It's got like 10 grocery bags in each hand, right? But that's what we all try to do. So, maybe we look at activities of daily living, I think from the wrong perspective. We look at it like the end stage, end of life activities of daily living, where I think we need to look at that progressively throughout adulthood. So what should you be able to know and be able to do in your 30s, 40s, and 50s? Like, can you get the stuff out of the trunk? Can you carry stuff in the house in one trip without getting tired? Can you do some of these other things that really give you independence of living that would help you later in life to not have to get assisted living or assisted care or to move into a facility? So I think if we were more preventive in terms of what we could find Strongman could help us with. So farmers carries have had some great pull there because we know the grip strength is a great predictor of longevity. So why not use that? Why not say, hey, you know what? Look at all the cool stuff you can grip because there's like 4 or 5 different types of grip. There's not just that one kind. So look at what kind of grips are good for what types of things. So I think the more we talk, the more we could explore all these questions. So maybe it's something within NSCA, you take it to the research committee and say, you know what? The Strongman SIG wants to conduct some research and here's some of our thoughts. Who's ready? How do we want to make this happen? So something like that might be good, or some position that comes from it on the efficacy of strongman for certain populations.
Strongman and research collaboration.
Yep.
I love it. So, okay. So you've read a lot of research over, you've been alive for a little while. What would you say are actually some of the most important, impactful research that applies to strongman that coaches should read if they haven't yet already?
Gosh, there's a good question. I'm really good at a lot of things. Remembering names and remembering research studies by name are 2 things that I'm really not very good at.
I'll tell you what, if you could remember the gist of it, I can circle back and link them after the fact.
Right. Sure. So we'll go back and figure it out that way. So I think one of the studies was from Paul Winwood, where he's looking at, and he did a survey of strongman competitors, found out like some of the habits that they had and some of their training. So I think for those who are interested in competing in strongman, that's a good study to look at, because he did take a look at like some of the injury rates, some of the technique things, the sleep, the calories and all that type of thing. So I think that was probably an interesting one. I think that Winwood and Justin Keogh were both involved in the ones that looked at the biomechanics of certain movements within strongman to figure out how they either equated with other movements or what some of the factors were for excellent movement within that particular lift. Like for Atlas stones, it really was kind of like a tire flip. Like how quickly could you go through the second pull was the key indicator of who did better than somebody else. So it wasn't lifting it from the floor. It wasn't even lapping. It was how quickly you could move through the second pull action of those lifts to get it to the top. Any of the pushing and pulling events, it really was how quickly you could turn your feet over that gave the best prediction of how well you did. So I think that was another interesting study. There's another interesting study that was showing, I'm trying to remember the exact results, but something to the effect of like doing different strongman implements would actually help your kettlebell swing, and kettlebell swings would help with other activities. So it's a study that shows that you don't always have to specifically do the movement you think you have to do. So we talk about that a lot in programming, right? That you always have to do this movement. And if you're not squatting, then your squat pattern is going to go out the window. Where this study kind of showed that, take a break from that squat pattern, try this squat pattern. It's still going to have a positive effect on squat patterning without having to do that same motion all the time. And I think that's especially for the general population, people who are training, they don't always want to do the same thing. They want to know what's new and fresh and exciting to keep them going with their program. Like every
Boy,
time
do I have the sport for you.
right? Like every time I get like the sled out or battle ropes for a general population, I'm like, oh, I've seen all the athletes do that on TV and they want me to take a picture of them doing it, right? Because it's just so cool. So like, why don't we do that for more people? Why is it that only athletes get to use the cool toys? Why doesn't everybody get to use that and make that a well-rounded part of their program? We get too hung up, I think, focusing on some of those health-related fitness variables rather than saying, you know what, fitness is fitness and it's whatever it means to you and whatever you want to get out of it. So let's help you get all of those different attributes.
So funny how some of us get so tied up in the weeds because some people love the strongman stuff. Like you said, the implements come out and they're like, yes, I get to, prove my grit. This is so cool. Like I've seen my cute little old ladies in the gym, but they're just like, can I do that? I'm like, absolutely. Let's come on over here. And then I have some people that are like, I don't want a single callus. Where's my gloves? I don't want to touch weights over 10 pounds. And you're just like, so there's different people. So I have noticed it's like there are some female populations out there that are completely turned off by just even the name of strongman.
Right.
So as a coach, like maybe this could be something we research is it's like, hey, what populations prefer the term strongman, or can we just call it functional fitness and kind of just slide it in there and have them not even know what we're talking about? But at the end of the day, it's like, like you said, fitness is fitness. What's strongman compared to this? And it's like, don't want to get too in the weeds of this one, but it's like, yes, there's the sport of strongman. There's the events that are in the umbrella of strongman, but then there's all the things we could change trade, not change. And it's so funny to me with that kettlebell study that you talked about that they were like, hey, how can we get better at kettlebells with strongman? And to me, that's so backwards. It's like, so wait, are you training the kettlebell? Like it's the event to compete for and strongman is the means to the end. Whereas in my head, I'm like, kettlebells are just training tools, but I know there's a lot of people out there that are very into kettlebells. It's a whole sport in and of itself for them. So I just think that's really funny is just like figuring out how to classify things and the definitions of things.
Yep. I think that's huge because we don't do a good job of that. Like we all look at fitness in a different way. We all look at our exercise techniques in a different way. We all look at our goals in a different way, but it really gets back to what's your why? Like, why are you doing this? What's so exciting? My why has always been since I was young that I wasn't going to get weak when I got old. I would keep after it, whatever I needed to do so I would not get weak when I got old. So compared to other people my age, I'm not weak. I'm not where I used to be, but I'm still pretty darn good shape. And there's nobody else where I train who's in my age group. So like on the one hand, that's good, but on the other hand, it's like, why not? Where's everybody, right? We should all be doing this because it's a great way of lifetime fitness, whatever you want to call those type of activities we try to get people to do. And like, why do we look at aerobic training as lifetime fitness activity when this is really what's going to help you with your longevity and be able to move quickly? Like I'm still the guy everybody calls when they move, right? Say we're moving all Rick, right? He can pick stuff up. He'll be happy to do that. And I love doing it actually. So it's kind of fun. Just, it's like an odd implement. Like, how do you pick this up? Like how many of us in strongman, like you're driving down the street and you'll see like a tree down, right? Like, oh, you know what? I think I can pick it up, or you'll see a rock. I'm like, I wonder how heavy that is. Right. So you see all that stuff when you're going around. So I just think like getting the infection of strongman among people to see that it really is cool and it's fun. And like you said, it doesn't have to be enormously heavy, but it can be functional. It can be fun. It can be something that just makes you feel better about yourself. Like it helps with your posture. It helps. Like I noticed when I first started doing strongman, I'd been doing gym training for years. And for some reason, like way back when, we didn't really focus on retracting our shoulders all that much. So when I did a pull down, I could do a pull down without retracting my shoulders. So the pretty heavy weight. But the first time I picked a stone up to carry it, it fell on the ground. Like, that's
you were doing your like the pull downs with the ultra.
Yeah, so my pull down, I hold the stone, but I wasn't pulling back to pull it into myself. I hold it. I just picked it up and it just fell right back down. I'm like, wait a minute. So, I think that was a cool part for me of strongman that like, I'd learned one way of training, but this is a way that really helps you. Mm-hmm. You'll know what weaknesses you have in your movement patterns when you train with strongman implements. So really, so that really helped me to figure out like, wow, I can do a lot better. And man, all of my lifts on the regular gym lifts went way up after I started doing strongman because it had so much transfer over to those. And that might be another area of study. Like, how does strongman really help? Like my deadlift escalated after I started doing like car deadlifts and other things. Like, it was unbelievable to see the change, but people don't look at that and they get stuck doing those same old exercises because that's what they know. So I think part of the research, if we could show how much of an improvement you could get from doing strongman exercises on the tried and true exercises, even in terms of Olympic lifting, I'm like, look how much Olympic weightlifting has gotten into strongman. Like
Mhm.
hardly anybody presses a log anymore. They all jerk, right? So
Yeah.
nobody's right. So if it's amazing to see the technique has gotten into it, and it has very good transferability, and that's what one of the studies had shown how well the log lift actually transferred over to doing a clean and jerk. So that would certainly make sense. But for those who have shoulder issues, maybe the log's better. It's a neutral grip, it's not a pronated
Mhm.
grip. So
Yeah.
maybe that's the better way to do it. So, just looking at some of those ideas for different populations, maybe that's the problem, right? Maybe there's just so much to do. We don't know where to start. So,
And you know what? That could very well be the case. And I think that this is still a relatively young sport. It's still
mhm,
kind of figuring out where it's going. I mean,
right.
even just this last week at OSG, it's like we're
Oh,
really seeing
oh,
a totally different sport start to emerge. I'm like,
oh,
whoa,
yeah.
I'm really like, because, when you and I started, it was just like, my first competition was on Huntington Beach. And I think like
Hmm.
MTV was there. Like it was like
Right,
super random. And there was
right,
like
right.
random people in swimsuits watching us. And it was like,
Yep,
oh, wow, this is
yep.
cool. Why are they picking
What
up
are they doing?
garbage? And now it looks like a production. Like this looks like
Mhm.
something that could be on ESPN.
Right.
So it's really cool to see. And I love what you talked about the transfer of training. I read that book actually, Anatoly Bondarch,
Yeah.
terrible at my
Yep.
Russian.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
Good
you.
job. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I love that book, Transfer of Training. And that would be
Right.
another great thing for people to research is it's like, hey, the transferability of these events to sports,
Hmm.
to life, to
Right.
rehab. And that could
Mhm.
be a place where people start. So what
Yeah.
I would say is, for us to really start improving the sport overall and to get more research done in the sport and high quality research, try to integrate your interests. If you're a rehab guy who likes strongman and you're a researcher,
Yep.
integrate that. Like I'm kind of like I'm starting to get into space science or human optimization performance space, whatever it's mouthful. So it's like, okay, can we do strongman in space?
Mm.
Probably. I think we should figure out a way to
Yeah.
make strongman a thing that we do to train to go to the moon because
Right.
the strongest, most resilient body is going to do better in space. So to me, that's like a
Mhm.
no brainer. So I would
Yeah.
love to do space
Hmm.
strongman integrated research. That would
Sure.
be
Right.
my pie in the sky.
Cool. Well, that makes so much sense too, because if I remember reading years ago that isn't there like a huge bone loss for astronauts in space?
Oh my gosh, it's
Yeah.
insane what they go through. And it's not just the bone loss.
Right.
There's so many issues with like blood volume changes.
Mhm.
Their heart atrophies because they lose so much water. And so it's like
Mhm.
their body's shrinking because it's losing water, but it's also
Mhm.
expanding because there's no gravity. And there's
Yep.
just a lot of atrophy in space.
Mm.
There's
Yep.
and it's so interesting. And I'm not an expert in this. I'm a student, a very low level student. It's an
Mm.
interest of mine, but my understanding is that they're still putting a greater emphasis on cardiovascular training in space. And my understanding is for those cardiovascular reasons is if your heart stops working in space, that's a greater problem than developing osteoporosis a few years after you come back from space. So I think they're kind of dealing with the biggest problems first. But again, research matters. And I think strongman matters. And I think strongman research needs to be happening more and more.
I agree, because you could also get metabolic conditioning with strongman, and there is a research study that shows that just as well as with other traditional implements by using weightlifting implements. And gosh, you're seeing that more and more in contests, right? There are more medleys, there are more
Totally.
ladders in contests than there used to be. So yeah, there's a lot of metabolic conditioning, which improves your overall aerobic fitness. So it's interesting. I get my heart monitored every year. And so every year I'm at the top of fitness and I don't do a whole lot of cardio, but just from doing all the medleys and everything else in strongman, it keeps my heart up. And that's for my age, of course, which isn't very good. But when you look at it across time, it's pretty impressive that I can maintain that type of physical conditioning without doing a lot of, what I would consider slow, long, boring cardio. But some people love it and that's fine. Right. But there are other ways to do it. And so if you're somebody out there who's not really excited about traditional cardio and you want to keep in really good shape, you could do implements of strongman and then do it that way. There's so many ways to handle all of the different goals we would have for our fitness.
I have actually a similar anecdote. I was previously a triathlete when I was a teenager,
Mm,
and then I didn't do any running, biking, or swimming for years
mm,
afterwards. Got into strongman, and then I went for a long, several day backpacking trip with my dog, heavy
mm.
backpack, and I was just like, "This is way easier than I remember it." And I hadn't even been doing that kind of training,
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
think strongman's the best.
Me too.
So let's finish on a high note.
Ooh.
Did you have anything else you wanted to say regarding research in strongman?
No, other than I'd love to hear from everybody too. And I know you would too. Well, let's get that collaboration go. What do people want to hear about? What do researchers know that is practical based on what we want to find out? And then how do we put those studies together? I think that's a great project.
Perfect.
Yep.
So let's end on our high note. I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite strongman coaching moment, either for yourself or something else that you witnessed?
I would probably have to say getting it in with the group. I've done some training of youth athletes in a country club setting, and to have them do strongman type training in the country club and embrace it and enjoy it and see how it has a positive benefit. And I also have them they get to create their own games. So one day we took a tire into the gym, and it was this little bigger than a car tire. So it's probably 125 pounds, maybe. They came up with this really cool game that rather than doing our traditional tug of war, they did a 2v2. So two kids grabbed onto each end of the tire, and it was a team tug of war, but rather than just being forward and back, it was all over the place. And
Oh,
it went for
wow.
10 minutes and they would not let go. They
Wow.
wouldn't give up. And it was unbelievable to watch. So they had seen all the other things that they'd done, how their grip strength was helping. So all the different things we'd done in there helped them to keep playing this game. They didn't want to stop. And when they did stop, they wanted to go again. I'm like, well, we'll have to do that tomorrow because you're pretty wiped out right now. But I think for me personally, is being able to get strongman into other groups. I know I mentioned a coach in the beginning that I went to, and I think coaches need coaching too. So I think the other big moment for me is saying, you know what, I have to have somebody else look at my movement patterns. I could watch your movement patterns all day and tell you exactly what you need. But when I'm doing it, I become a motor moron, right? I'm like, oh, I'm not paying any attention. I just pick it up. I'm like, no, you need to do this. So having somebody else to do that. And I think that's an important thing for all of us that, sometimes have another professional take a look at what you're doing and see what pointers you can pick up.
I love that so much, Rick. Thank you so much for giving us that valuable insight. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. And like we said, please leave a comment, like it, share it. Let's get some anabolic conversations going in this group. Till next time.